I never thought the sound of a ringing phone at 7 in the morning would become the catalyst for the most important decision of my 72 years on this earth. The shrill sound pierced through the peaceful quiet of my Highland Park home, jarring me from my morning routine of tending to my prize-winning roses. My hands, still soil-stained from deadheading the blooms, trembled slightly as I answered, expecting perhaps a wrong number or an overeager telemarketer. Instead, I heard the crisp, professional voice of someone from American Express calling about an outstanding balance of $85,000 on a black card registered under my son Michael's name. The woman's tone was respectful but firm, as she explained that I was listed as the guarantor, and the account was now seriously delinquent. The charges, she continued, included luxury car rentals, frequent flights to Las Vegas, and purchases at high-end boutiques across Dallas. My heart sank as I listened, not because of the money, but because none of this sounded like my Michael. The son I raised was responsible, methodical, careful, with finances to a fault. This spending pattern belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had apparently taken control of his judgment and his credit. I had been watching this transformation for months. Ever since Isabella Rossi had entered Michael's life 8 months ago, my successful architect son had slowly become someone I barely recognized. The changes started small. He canceled our weekly Sunday dinners, claiming he was too busy with work projects I never heard about. Then came the expensive gifts for his new girlfriend, items that seemed far beyond what even his successful practice could comfortably afford. Isabella was undeniably beautiful, with dark hair that cascaded in perfect waves, and an accent she claimed was Italian, but sounded inconsistent to my trained ear. At 67, I had developed a keen sense for people who weren't quite what they seemed. Something about the way her eyes would dart around our family home during her few visits, cataloging valuable pieces with the efficiency of an appraiser, set off alarm bells in my mind. But Michael was completely enchanted. He spoke of her with the blind devotion of a teenager experiencing first love, even though he was 35 years old and had been married before. When I gently suggested they take more time to get to know each other, his response was swift and defensive. He accused me of being unable to accept his happiness, of being a controlling mother who couldn't let her son live his own life. The accusations stung because they contained just enough truth to make me question myself. I had been protective of Michael after his divorce 3 years earlier. I had watched him struggle through months of depression and self-doubt. And yes, I had been relieved when he finally seemed ready to date again. But Isabella felt different from the beginning, and not in a way that brought me comfort. After that phone call about the credit card debt, I knew I couldn't remain passive any longer. I spent the morning calling my attorney and oldest friend, Arthur Hemlock, arranging to meet him for lunch downtown. Arthur had been the family lawyer for over 4 decades, present for every major decision and crisis we had faced since my husband's death 20 years ago. Over lunch, I laid out everything I knew about Isabella and Michael's increasingly erratic behavior. Arthur listened with the patience and attention that had made him one of Dallas's most respected attorneys. When I finished, Arthur leaned back and studied me with those sharp gray eyes that had served him so well in courtrooms across Texas. Based on what I had described, he believed Michael was being systematically manipulated by someone with considerable experience in financial fraud. That afternoon, Arthur introduced me to Davis, a retired Dallas police detective who now worked as a private investigator. Davis was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent dealing with human nature at its worst. He listened to my story with professional detachment, taking notes, and asking precise questions about timeline and details. Within 72 hours, Davis had uncovered information that confirmed my worst fears. Isabella Rossi was not her real name. The woman my son planned to marry was actually Jennifer Smith, a con artist with a criminal record in Florida and Arizona. She had served 18 months in prison for fraud and had been suspected in at least 3 other cases where wealthy, lonely men had been systematically stripped of their assets. The man she claimed was her cousin Marco was actually her longtime partner in these schemes, both romantically and professionally. They had perfected a routine where Isabella would target successful, recently divorced men, while Marco played various supporting roles. Their last confirmed victim had been a real estate developer in Scottsdale, who lost nearly $500,000. Davis presented me with photographs that made my stomach turn. Images of Isabella and Marco together at restaurants and hotels, clearly intimate in ways that contradicted their claimed family relationship. Bank records showing a systematic pattern of financial manipulation. Even testimony from their previous victim, a broken man who had trusted them completely until it was almost too late. I sat in Davis's cramped office, staring at the evidence spread across his desk, feeling a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. I had been right about Isabella, but being right meant that my son was in terrible danger, both financially and emotionally. The next step required careful planning. I couldn't simply present this evidence to Michael and expect him to accept it. Isabella had spent months conditioning him to distrust my motives. Any direct confrontation would likely drive him further into her arms and deeper into financial ruin. Instead, Arthur and I developed a trap that would force Isabella to reveal her true nature in a way that even Michael couldn't deny or rationalize away. I called Michael that evening, keeping my voice carefully neutral and apologetic. I told him that our last conversation had troubled me deeply, and I realized I might have been too harsh in my judgment of Isabella. I asked if they would come to dinner at my house the following Sunday, explaining that I wanted to make amends and discuss making a substantial financial contribution to their wedding as a gesture of support. Michael's relief was palpable. He had always hated conflict between us, and I could hear how much our recent tensions had been weighing on him. He eagerly accepted the invitation and promised to bring Isabella, who he said would be thrilled to know I was ready to welcome her properly into the family. That Sunday dinner was one of the most difficult performances of my life. I smiled and made pleasant conversation while Isabella displayed the full force of her charm, talking enthusiastically about wedding plans and her supposed business ventures. She wore a stunning diamond bracelet that I recognized from Tiffany, easily worth $15,000, and casually mentioned that Michael had surprised her with it the previous week. After dinner, as we sat in my living room with coffee, I made my move. I told them both that I had been thinking seriously about their future and wanted to make a meaningful contribution. I explained that I was prepared to establish a trust fund in Isabella's name worth $500,000 to be released upon their marriage. Isabella's reaction was everything Arthur had predicted. Her eyes lit up with unmistakable greed, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed persona slipped. She began talking rapidly about how grateful she was, how this would allow them to buy the house they had been looking at, how it would secure their future together. Michael was overwhelmed with emotion, tears in his eyes, as he thanked me for my generosity. He had no idea that what he was witnessing was not gratitude, but the calculated response of a professional predator who had just been offered a larger prize than she had initially planned to take. I told them that I would have Arthur prepare the necessary legal documents and that we could meet at his office the following Thursday to make everything official. Isabella could barely contain her excitement. Michael, still emotional, hugged me tightly and whispered that he was so happy we could be a real family again. The next 3 days were among the longest of my life. Arthur worked with Davis to coordinate every detail of what we had planned, ensuring that all the necessary people would be in place. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I dressed carefully for what I knew would be one of the most important days of my life. I chose a navy blue suit that made me feel strong and professional, armor for the confrontation ahead. At Arthur's office, Isabella arrived exactly on time, with Marco waiting in the lobby as he always did. She looked radiant, wearing a new outfit that probably cost more than many people made in a month. Michael was already there, nervous but excited, clutching a small velvet box that I realized must contain an engagement ring. Arthur began by welcoming everyone and explaining the basic structure of the trust fund. Isabella listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of financial instruments for someone who claimed to work in art importing. Then Arthur smiled and said the words we had rehearsed. He told Isabella that before we could proceed, he needed to verify some basic information for the legal documents. He asked for her full legal name, her social security number, and her previous addresses for the past 5 years. I watched Isabella's face as the trap began to close. She maintained her composure admirably, providing answers that sounded plausible, but that I knew Davis had already proven to be false. When Arthur asked about her previous address in Scottsdale, I saw the first real crack in her facade. Michael sensed something was wrong, but couldn't understand what it was. He kept looking between Arthur and Isabella with growing confusion, clearly wondering why these routine questions were taking so long. Arthur excused himself to retrieve some additional paperwork. When he returned, he was not alone. Davis entered first, followed by 2 Dallas police detectives and a man I didn't recognize but who Isabella clearly knew. Her face went completely white as the stranger introduced himself as Robert Chen, the real estate developer from Arizona who had been their previous victim. The next few minutes unfolded with terrible inevitability. Arthur presented the evidence Davis had gathered, document by document, photograph by photograph. Isabella tried at first to maintain her innocence, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. But when Chen began to speak, describing in detail how she had manipulated him exactly as she was manipulating Michael, her composure finally shattered completely. She turned on Michael with a viciousness that was shocking to witness, screaming that he was pathetic and stupid, that she had never loved him, and had only tolerated his boring company for the money she could get from his family. Michael sat frozen in his chair, the small jewelry box still clutched in his hand, watching the woman he had planned to marry reveal herself as someone he had never really known. The transformation was so complete and so ugly that I almost felt sorry for Isabella, seeing how thoroughly she had trapped herself in a life of deception. The police arrested both Isabella and Marco that afternoon. They were charged with fraud, identity theft, and several other felonies. Michael and I were told that our cooperation would likely be crucial in ensuring they received significant prison sentences. Later that evening, Michael and I sat in my kitchen, both of us emotionally exhausted. He kept apologizing, saying he should have listened to me, that he had been blind and foolish. I told him that love often makes us blind, and that the important thing was that he was safe now. But even as I comforted my son, I was grappling with my own complex emotions about what I had done. I had saved Michael from financial ruin and probably years of emotional abuse. But I had also orchestrated an elaborate deception. The fact that it had been necessary didn't make me feel entirely good about the methods I had used. The next few weeks were difficult for both of us. Michael struggled with feelings of shame and self-doubt, questioning his judgment in ways that were painful to watch. I encouraged him to speak with a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from manipulative relationships. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a compassionate woman who had worked with many victims of financial and emotional fraud. She helped Michael understand that what had happened to him was not a reflection of personal weakness, but rather the result of sophisticated psychological manipulation by someone with years of experience. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own need for reflection and healing. The months of stress and the dramatic confrontation had taken a toll on me. I began seeing Dr. Martinez myself, not because I felt guilty about exposing Isabella, but because I realized that the experience had changed me in ways I was still discovering. Through our therapy sessions, both Michael and I began to understand the broader patterns that had made him vulnerable. His divorce had left him feeling rejected and unworthy of love, making him grateful for any attention from an attractive woman. His desire to prove his independence from me had made him resistant to my concerns. For my part, I had to acknowledge that my protective instincts, while ultimately correct in this case, had sometimes been excessive in the past. I had struggled to find the right balance between caring for my adult son and respecting his autonomy. 3 months after Isabella's arrest, the criminal case went to trial. Michael and I both testified about our experiences, and I found the process strangely cathartic. Isabella was ultimately sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, while Marco received 4 years. The judge commented that their crimes were particularly heinous because they targeted people's basic human need for love and connection. After the trial, Michael and I began to rebuild our relationship on a new foundation. We established clearer boundaries about his independence while maintaining our close emotional connection. He started dating again, but more cautiously. And he always introduced me to women he was serious about. Not because I demanded it, but because he valued my perspective. I also made changes in my own life. I became involved with a support group for families affected by financial fraud, sharing my experience with other parents who had watched their loved ones fall victim to manipulative schemes. I discovered that my story was far from unique, and that many intelligent, caring people had found themselves in similar situations. 1 year after Isabella's arrest, Michael met Sarah, a fellow architect who shared his passion for sustainable design. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on common interests and genuine compatibility, rather than the intense, artificial chemistry that Isabella had manufactured. When Michael proposed to Sarah 18 months later, he did it without fanfare or family involvement, exactly as it should be. He called me afterward to share the news, and I could hear in his voice the quiet confidence of a man who was sure of his decision. Their wedding was a small, elegant affair held at the Dallas Arboretum. This time, the celebration felt genuine and joyful rather than performative. Sarah's family welcomed Michael warmly, and I found myself with a daughter-in-law who treated me like a respected friend rather than an obstacle to overcome. Looking back now, 2 years after that morning phone call that changed everything, I realized that the experience with Isabella taught me lessons I needed to learn about trust, boundaries, and the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. It also showed me that sometimes loving someone means being willing to be temporarily hated by them if that's what it takes to keep them safe. I still tend my roses every morning, and I still answer my phone when it rings unexpectedly. But I'm more aware now of the various ways people can try to manipulate others, and I'm more confident in my ability to recognize and respond to those attempts. I'm also more comfortable with the idea that sometimes the people we love have to learn difficult lessons, and that our job is to be there for them when they do. Michael and Sarah visit me most Sunday afternoons now, and we work in the garden together or sit on the porch talking about their latest projects. Sarah has proven to have an excellent eye for design, and she's helped me plan some beautiful additions to my landscaping. More importantly, she treats Michael with the kind of casual affection that speaks of genuine partnership. The support group continues to be an important part of my life. I've learned that sharing difficult experiences with others who understand them is one of the most healing things we can do for ourselves and each other. I've also learned that many people my age struggle with similar challenges around boundaries with their adult children. These days, when I wake up in the morning and step out into my garden, I feel a sense of peace and purpose that I didn't have before the Isabella crisis. Not because I'm glad it happened, but because I'm proud of how I handled it and grateful for what it taught me about my own strength and resilience. I proved to myself that even at 72, I was capable of decisive action when someone I loved was threatened. I also proved that I could change long-established patterns in my relationships when those changes were necessary for everyone's well-being. Most importantly, I learned that trust is not something we should give blindly, but that doesn't mean we should withhold it completely either. The morning phone calls still come occasionally, but now they're usually from Michael checking on my plans for the day, or Sarah asking about my rose-growing techniques, or other members of my support group sharing updates about their families. The sound of the phone ringing no longer fills me with dread, because I've learned that most problems, even very serious ones, can be solved if we're willing to face them honestly and ask for help when we need it. My roses continue to win prizes at the local garden show, and I continue to find deep satisfaction in the daily work of tending them. There's something profoundly hopeful about creating order and beauty in a small corner of the world that you can actually control. It's a reminder that even when we can't fix everything, we can always choose to make something better than we found it.